What if I told you that the poorest person you know possesses the exact same wealth-building tool as Warren Buffett, yet 99% of humanity will die without ever discovering it? What if the secret to financial freedom isn't locked behind high salaries, prestigious degrees, or family inheritance, but hidden in plain sight within the most mundane moments of your daily spending? There's a reason why the financial establishment never teaches this principle in schools, why banks profit from your ignorance of it, and why even intelligent people remain trapped in cycles of scarcity while this invisible force operates right under their noses. The question isn't whether you have enough money to build wealth. It's whether you understand the fundamental difference between what money appears to be and what it actually represents. Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing and mentor to the world's greatest investor, discovered something that Wall Street desperately hopes you'll never learn: that wealth creation operates on principles so simple, so universally accessible, that a janitor with the right knowledge can outperform Harvard MBAs with six-figure salaries. But here's what's truly unsettling. This isn't about budgeting tricks, side hustles, or cutting back on coffee. This is about recognizing that every dollar you possess is either working for you or against you every single moment. And most people unknowingly choose the latter. Graham called it the arithmetic of compound interest. But what he really discovered was a form of financial alchemy that transforms time itself into wealth, regardless of income level. Consider this disturbing reality. While you've been told that wealth building requires large sums of money, millionaires have been created from minimum wage salaries, using principles that violate everything conventional wisdom teaches about money. They understood something that escapes even high earners: that the velocity of money matters infinitely more than the volume, that consistency trumps intensity, and that the market's greatest opportunities reveal themselves precisely when your bank account feels most inadequate. Graham observed that the stock market in the short run is a voting machine, but in the long run it's a weighing machine. And those who learn to think like the scale rather than the crowd discover that small amounts of money can generate disproportionately large returns through a psychological phenomenon most investors never recognize. The uncomfortable truth Graham uncovered is that poverty isn't primarily a money problem. It's a knowledge problem disguised as a money problem. While the masses chase higher incomes believing more money will solve their financial struggles, a small percentage of people have learned to make their existing money multiply through mechanisms that operate independently of salary increases. This isn't about living below your means. It's about making your means work below the radar of taxes, inflation, and market volatility. Graham's disciples discovered that the market rewards patience in ways that contradict human psychology, that the best investment opportunities emerge during moments of maximum pessimism, and that building wealth with limited funds requires embracing paradoxes that feel wrong but produce results that speak for themselves. But here's the twist that Graham himself warned about, and why this knowledge remains hidden in plain sight. Applying these principles requires confronting the most dangerous enemy of wealth creation, one that lives inside your own mind and whispers convincing lies about why this won't work for you. The enemy isn't lack of money, market crashes, or economic uncertainty. It's the deeply embedded belief system that equates financial success with income level, that mistakes activity for progress, and that surrenders long-term wealth for short-term comfort. Graham's final lesson was perhaps his most crucial: that the investor's chief problem and even his worst enemy is likely to be himself, and the person who masters this internal battle with limited resources will achieve financial results that escape those who never learned to think like money itself. What if I told you that the poorest person you know possesses the exact same wealth-building tool as Warren Buffett, yet 99% of humanity will die without ever discovering it? What if the secret to financial freedom isn't locked behind high salaries, prestigious degrees, or family inheritance, but hidden in plain sight within the most mundane moments of your daily spending? There's a reason why the financial establishment never teaches this principle in schools, why banks profit from your ignorance of it, and why even intelligent people remain trapped in cycles of scarcity while this invisible force operates right under their noses. The question isn't whether you have enough money to build wealth. It's whether you understand the fundamental difference between what money appears to be and what it actually represents. Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing and mentor to the world's greatest investor, discovered something that Wall Street desperately hopes you'll never learn: that wealth creation operates on principles so simple, so universally accessible, that a janitor with the right knowledge can outperform Harvard MBAs with six-figure salaries. But here's what's truly unsettling. This isn't about budgeting tricks, side hustles, or cutting back on coffee. This is about recognizing that every dollar you possess is either working for you or against you, every single moment, and most people unknowingly choose the latter. Graham called it the arithmetic of compound interest. But what he really discovered was a form of financial alchemy that transforms time itself into wealth, regardless of income level. Consider this disturbing reality. While you've been told that wealth building requires large sums of money, millionaires have been created from minimum wage salaries using principles that violate everything conventional wisdom teaches about money. They understood something that escapes even high earners, that the velocity of money matters infinitely more than the volume, that consistency trumps intensity, and that the market's greatest opportunities reveal themselves precisely when your bank account feels most inadequate. Graham observed that the stock market in the short run is a voting machine, but in the long run, it's a weighing machine. And those who learn to think like the scale rather than the crowd discover that small amounts of money can generate disproportionately large returns through a psychological phenomenon most investors never recognize. The uncomfortable truth Graham uncovered is that poverty isn't primarily a money problem. It's a knowledge problem disguised as a money problem. While the masses chase higher incomes believing more money will solve their financial struggles, a small percentage of people have learned to make their existing money multiply through mechanisms that operate independently of salary increases. This isn't about living below your means. It's about making your means work below the radar of taxes, inflation, and market volatility. Graham's disciples discovered that the market rewards patience in ways that contradict human psychology, that the best investment opportunities emerge during moments of maximum pessimism, and that building wealth with limited funds requires embracing paradoxes that feel wrong but produce results that speak for themselves. But here's the twist that Graham himself warned about, and why this knowledge remains hidden in plain sight. Applying these principles requires confronting the most dangerous enemy of wealth creation, one that lives inside your own mind and whispers convincing lies about why this won't work for you. The enemy isn't lack of money, market crashes, or economic uncertainty. It's the deeply embedded belief system that equates financial success with income level, that mistakes activity for progress, and that surrenders long-term wealth for short-term comfort. Graham's final lesson was perhaps his most crucial, that the investor's chief problem, and even his worst enemy, is likely to be himself. And the person who masters this internal battle with limited resources will achieve financial results that escape those who never learned to think like money itself. The descent into financial reality. I remember the first time I understood what Graham meant when he said that the market serves as both a voting machine and a weighing machine. It was the moment I realized that every financial decision you've ever made was influenced by voices that weren't your own. Think about it. When did you first learn what money was supposed to mean? Was it through the anxious whispers of parents discussing bills behind closed doors, the grinding exhaustion in your father's eyes as he counted change, or the suffocating weight of watching dreams die one unpaid expense at a time? The truth is, most of us inherited our relationship with money from people who were themselves wounded by it, and we've been unconsciously perpetuating their fears, limitations, and misconceptions ever since. Graham understood that before you can make money work for you, you must first excavate the emotional archaeology of your financial beliefs, because the person who taught you that money doesn't grow on trees never learned that it actually does, in the form of dividends that compound while you sleep. The cruelest irony of modern financial education is that it teaches you to think like prey in a system designed for predators. You've been conditioned to believe that wealth building is a privilege reserved for those born into the right circumstances. Yet Graham proved repeatedly that this conditioning is precisely what keeps the masses impoverished. Consider how thoroughly you've been programmed. You work harder for less money while others work less for exponentially more. And somehow you've been convinced this is natural rather than manufactured. The stock market, that mysterious realm you've been taught to fear, operates on principles so mathematically predictable that Graham called it the refuge of the small investor. Yet financial institutions spend billions convincing you it's too dangerous, too complex, too risky for someone like you. What if I told you that this fear is not accidental but carefully cultivated? Because your ignorance is literally their profit margin. Every dollar you keep in a savings account earning 1% while inflation devours 3% is a dollar that banks invest for 20% returns on your behalf. And they sleep well at night knowing you believe you're being responsible. Here's where Graham's wisdom becomes almost unbearably personal. The moment you realize that your financial struggle isn't about lacking money, but about lacking the psychological framework to think like money thinks. Money doesn't recognize your self-worth, your past failures, or your current limitations. Money only recognizes mathematical principles that operate with the cold precision of natural law. While you've been waiting for permission to invest, for the right time, for more knowledge, for a better income, money has been multiplying for those who understand that permission is never granted. It's taken. Graham discovered that the market rewards courage disguised as patience, that it punishes intelligence corrupted by emotion, and that it offers its greatest gifts to those willing to act when action feels most impossible. The question that haunts every Graham student is this: how much wealth have you already lost by waiting for conditions that will never be perfect enough to satisfy your fear-based mind? But here's the revelation that changes everything. And this is where Graham's teaching transcends mere investment strategy and becomes a form of psychological liberation. The market doesn't care about your story. It doesn't care that you started late, that you don't have much, that you've made mistakes, or that others seem more qualified. The market operates on principles so fundamentally democratic that a single share purchased with hard-earned dollars grants you the same ownership rights as a billionaire's million-share position. This isn't motivational rhetoric, this is mathematical reality. When you buy a piece of a profitable company at a discount to its intrinsic value, you become a business owner. The profits of that business flow to you. The compound growth of that business compounds for you. Time works for you. And all of this happens regardless of your background, education, or current circumstances. Graham called it Mr. Market's daily offer. Every trading day, the market presents you with opportunities to buy pieces of profitable enterprises at prices that fluctuate wildly based on emotion rather than fundamental value. The question is not whether these opportunities exist. The question is whether you've developed the emotional intelligence to recognize them when they appear. The architecture of financial transformation. Now comes the moment of cognitive dissonance, when your rational mind begins to grasp what your emotional mind has been trained to reject. Graham's most radical insight wasn't about stock picking or market timing. It was about the psychological transformation required to see money as it actually is, rather than as you've been conditioned to perceive it. Money is not scarce. That's the first lie you must unlearn. Money is abundant, flowing and multiplying constantly through mechanisms that operate 24 hours a day across global markets. What's scarce is the mindset that can harness this abundance. You've been taught to hoard when you should circulate, to save when you should invest, to think small when you should think systematically. Graham observed that most people approach investing like gambling because they've never learned to think like owners. And they've never learned to think like owners because they've been systematically trained to think like employees. The employee mindset asks, how can I protect what little I have? The owner mindset asks, how can I acquire assets that generate wealth whether I'm working or not? This is where Graham's teaching becomes uncomfortably intimate, because recognizing these principles intellectually is vastly different from implementing them emotionally. You can understand compound interest mathematically while still being paralyzed by the fear of loss. You can appreciate the logic of dollar cost averaging while still being seduced by the fantasy of perfect timing. You can grasp the power of owning profitable businesses while still being hypnotized by the security of cash that's slowly being devalued by inflation. Graham knew that the investor's greatest enemy is not market volatility. It's the inability to act in harmony with long-term mathematical certainties while being bombarded by short-term emotional noise. How many times have you delayed a financial decision not because you lacked information, but because you lacked the courage to trust what you already knew? How many opportunities have you watched pass by not because they weren't good enough, but because you weren't ready to believe you deserved them? The most profound shift Graham demands is this: you must learn to think in decades rather than days, in systems rather than events, in principles rather than predictions. This isn't merely an intellectual adjustment, it's a complete rewiring of your relationship with time itself. While others chase quick returns and immediate gratification, you begin to see that wealth is built through the accumulation of small, consistent actions that compound over periods most people can't psychologically tolerate. Graham called it the boring path to riches. And it's boring precisely because it requires you to ignore the financial noise that keeps others perpetually distracted and perpetually poor. The market will crash. The economy will fluctuate. Individual stocks will disappoint. But underneath these surface disturbances, profitable businesses continue generating profits, paying dividends, and increasing in value. The investor who can think like a business owner rather than a stock trader begins to see market volatility not as danger but as opportunity, chances to acquire quality assets at temporary discounts. But Graham's most dangerous insight, dangerous because it shatters the comfortable excuses that justify financial mediocrity, is that building wealth with limited income is actually easier than building wealth with unlimited income. The person with little money is forced to think strategically, to research thoroughly, to act deliberately. They can't afford to be careless, impulsive, or overconfident. Every decision carries weight. Every dollar matters. This constraint, which appears to be a disadvantage, becomes a form of discipline that wealthy people often lose. Graham observed that some of the worst investors he knew were those who could afford to lose money, because they never developed the survival instincts that limited resources demand. The person investing $50 a month in carefully selected companies often achieves better long-term results than the person investing $5,000 monthly in whatever their financial advisor recommends. Why? Because the person with $50 is forced to think like an owner from day one, while the person with $5,000 can afford to think like a gambler for years before the consequences catch up with them. The revelation of hidden mechanisms. This is the point where most people's minds begin to resist, not because the information is too complex, but because the implications are too vast. If what Graham discovered is true, if wealth building is accessible to anyone willing to think differently about money, then what does that say about your current financial situation? What does that say about the years you've spent believing that financial freedom was reserved for others? The uncomfortable truth is that you've been living inside a manufactured reality, one that benefits from your confusion, your fear, and your inaction. The systems you trust to guide your financial decisions, the traditional banks, the conventional advisors, the mainstream financial media, all profit from keeping you dependent rather than independent. They make money when you remain financially illiterate, when you park your wealth in low-yield accounts, when you buy high and sell low based on emotional reactions to market noise. Graham's revolution wasn't just about investment strategy. It was about recognizing that financial independence requires intellectual independence from the systems designed to keep you financially dependent. Here's where the psychology becomes almost unbearable. Every month you delay learning these principles is a month of compound growth you can never recover. Every year you spend thinking you don't have enough to start investing is a year that profitable businesses grow without your participation. Time is the most powerful force in wealth building, and it's the one resource you can never replace. Graham understood that the person who starts investing $20 a month at age 25 will likely accumulate more wealth than the person who starts investing $200 a month at age 35. This isn't theory, it's mathematical certainty. The market doesn't care about your reasons for waiting, it only recognizes participation. While you've been preparing to invest, others have been investing while preparing. While you've been learning about the market, others have been learning from the market. The difference compounds daily, silently, relentlessly. The most psychologically challenging aspect of Graham's teaching is that it forces you to confront the gap between your financial potential and your financial reality. If building wealth is truly this accessible, this systematic, this mathematically predictable, then why isn't everyone wealthy? The answer reveals the most uncomfortable truth of all. Most people prefer the familiar pain of financial limitation to the unfamiliar effort of financial education. They would rather complain about their circumstances than change their thinking. They would rather blame external forces than take internal responsibility. Graham observed that the market is designed to transfer wealth from the impatient to the patient, from the emotional to the rational, from the ignorant to the informed. It's not personal, it's mathematical. But here's what makes it personal. You get to choose which side of this equation you want to be on. Every day, with every financial decision, you're casting a vote for either wealth or poverty, abundance or scarcity, ownership or dependency. But the deepest truth Graham uncovered, the one that transforms mere investment knowledge into life-changing wisdom, is that learning to invest properly is really learning to think properly about everything. The patience required to hold quality investments through market volatility teaches you patience with life's inevitable challenges. The discipline required to invest consistently regardless of market conditions teaches you discipline in all areas of personal development. The emotional control required to buy when others are selling and hold when others are panicking teaches you emotional intelligence that extends far beyond financial markets. Graham realized that investing is ultimately a mirror that reflects your deepest beliefs about yourself, your future, and your worthiness of abundance. The person who cannot invest confidently in their financial future is usually the same person who cannot invest confidently in their personal growth, their relationships, or their dreams. This is why Graham's students often report that learning to invest changed not just their financial situation, but their entire relationship with possibility itself. The point of no return. We've reached the moment of truth, the place where intellectual understanding either transforms into life-changing action or dissolves into comfortable rationalization. You now know something that 90% of people will never learn. That wealth building is not dependent on high income, perfect timing, or privileged access. You understand that the market offers daily opportunities to acquire ownership stakes in profitable businesses at prices that fluctuate based on emotion rather than value. You recognize that compound interest, properly harnessed, can transform small monthly investments into substantial wealth over time. But knowledge without application is just sophisticated ignorance. The question is no longer what you know, it's what you're willing to do with what you know. And this is where Graham's teaching becomes ruthlessly personal. The market doesn't reward good intentions, noble goals, or sincere plans to start someday. The market only rewards participation. Here's the psychological trap that catches most people at this exact moment. They begin to negotiate with the principles instead of surrendering to them. They want to modify Graham's approach to fit their unique circumstances, their special limitations, their particular fears. They want to wait for the right stock, the perfect entry point, the ideal market conditions. But Graham discovered that this negotiation is actually a sophisticated form of procrastination, a way of maintaining the illusion of progress while avoiding the discomfort of action. The person who spends 6 months researching the perfect investment usually achieves worse results than the person who spends 6 days learning the basics and then begins applying them consistently. Why? Because the market rewards experience over expertise, participation over preparation. You don't learn to invest by studying investing. You learn to invest by investing while studying. The most profound realization comes when you understand that your current financial situation is not a starting point. It's a choice point. Every day you choose whether to think like someone who builds wealth or someone who wishes for wealth. Every dollar you spend is either an investment in assets that appreciate or an expense that depreciates. Every financial decision either moves you closer to ownership or deeper into dependency. Graham's genius was recognizing that these choices happen in seemingly insignificant moments. The daily coffee that could become a monthly investment contribution, the impulse purchase that could become a carefully selected stock, the entertainment expense that could become an education expense. The transformation from scarcity to abundance happens not through dramatic gestures, but through thousands of small decisions that align with wealth-building principles rather than wealth-consuming habits. But here's where Graham's teaching reaches its most transformative depth: the realization that you've been waiting for permission that will never come. No one is going to validate your right to build wealth. No one is going to guarantee that your investments will perform perfectly. No one is going to protect you from the psychological discomfort of owning assets that fluctuate in value. The market operates on a simple principle that Graham stated repeatedly. It rewards those who can think independently and act courageously while others think collectively and act fearfully. This means that the moment you start building wealth seriously, you will be surrounded by people who question your decisions, predict your failure, and project their own financial fears onto your financial choices. The ability to continue investing consistently while being criticized, doubted, and misunderstood is perhaps the greatest skill an investor can develop. Because in the end, your wealth is built in silence, compounds in private, and reveals itself when others finally stop talking and start asking how you did it. The echo of awakening. Years from now, when you find yourself sitting across from someone who asks how you transformed your financial life, how you escaped the gravitational pull of financial mediocrity that captures so many others, you will struggle to explain the moment everything shifted. It wasn't when you learned about compound interest or discovered the mathematical certainties that govern wealth creation. It wasn't even when you made your first investment or watched your money begin multiplying through mechanisms you now understand but once feared. The transformation happened in the silence after understanding, in that suspended moment when you realized that the person you were before this knowledge and the person you could become after it were separated not by circumstances, but by choice. Graham knew that true wealth begins not with the first dollar invested, but with the first thought that dares to imagine a different financial destiny. In that quiet space between ignorance and action, between fear and faith, between scarcity and abundance, something ancient awakens. The recognition that you were never meant to live at the mercy of money, but to make money serve the life you were meant to live. The most profound truth Graham left us is not found in his formulas or investment strategies, but in the understanding that financial freedom is ultimately about psychological freedom, the liberation from the limiting beliefs that masquerade as practical wisdom, the courage to act on mathematical certainties while others remain paralyzed by emotional uncertainties. What you've discovered here isn't just a method for making money work harder. It's a way of thinking that transforms every aspect of how you engage with possibility itself. The person who can patiently build wealth through consistent investment in undervalued assets develops the same psychological muscles needed to build anything worthwhile in life: relationships, skills, dreams, legacy. This is why Graham's students often report that learning to invest changed everything, not just their bank accounts. When you master the art of delayed gratification in service of compound growth, when you develop the emotional intelligence to buy when others sell and hold when others panic, when you learn to think in decades rather than days, you become someone who can navigate any challenge with the quiet confidence that comes from understanding how time and consistency create miracles that appear sudden to those who weren't paying attention. Here lies the secret that will haunt you until you act upon it. Every passing day is either an investment in the wealth you'll build or a contribution to the poverty you'll perpetuate. And there is no neutral ground in this silent war between your current self and your potential self. If these words have stirred something in you, if you feel the uncomfortable recognition that you've been living beneath your financial potential, then you've reached the only moment that truly matters, the moment of decision. Will you remain a spectator to your own life, watching from the sidelines as others build the financial freedom you continue to dream about? Or will you finally step into the arena where wealth is created by those courageous enough to think differently and act consistently? If this message has found you ready to awaken the sleeping giant of your financial potential, if you're prepared to begin the quiet revolution that transforms small investments into substantial wealth, then show me you're serious. Hit that like button to signal your commitment to this journey. Leave a comment sharing what limiting belief about money you're ready to release. Subscribe to this channel because your financial education has only just begun. And share this with someone who deserves to know that their current circumstances are not their permanent destiny, because true wealth is built not by those who wait for perfect conditions, but by those who begin with imperfect courage and let time and consistency work their inevitable magic.